Ladies and gentlemen, I am a Steve Jones. We're going to show you something you won't see anywhere else on the planet. Guys, it's very dangerous back here. I will be handing out a few weapons. What that means is it's not an excuse to riot. It is, of course, the start of a stick man show. What you've been waiting for. When you hand you a weapon, 2, 3.
So, hello everybody. Welcome to Whining On. Once again, my name is Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue, and today we have Tim Terror, the one and only Stickman.
Hello. Now, Matt, that one really brings back memories. That video is from years ago in Galway. It was probably one of the first ones that was ever recorded with the box.
Wow.
It still has, yeah. I never always used to have the box, but that was one of the first ones that I ever saw that being filmed after the box came into existence.
Wow, I can tell it was definitely a fair few years ago. Are you looking at early 2000s for that?
I have no idea what the date is on that one. I can pretty much guarantee the date on the video is wrong, though.
Yeah, when we checked out the video, it was 2009, and we suspected not. For one thing, in the background is a photo shop. A shop that develops photographs in 1 hour. That's definitely earlier than 2009.
We used to actually wait until that photo shop and a barber shop behind it closed. We had to wait till after 6 o'clock at night so we could actually do the shows there. That was back in the days of Johnny Massacre and Dave McSavage when they were still on the street.
Well, we'll probably get into those days a little bit more in a while. I suppose let's get into the interview. Why become a performer? Did you become a performer as a young man? Was it the first thing you did when you reached adulthood?
Actually, no. I did become a performer, but not the kind of performer I am now.
Okay.
I did everything from singing in church choirs to doing productions, rather weird ones, actually. I'd say the first performance I did was actually in church.
Okay, and how old were you then?
Oh, God, I was just a kid. I grew up in it. I had the joy of actually having a pastor that was one of the best showmen I ever met.
So explain your young life then a little bit.
Okay, well, when I started out, I was growing up on a farm, so I was a farm boy. And until I was 9, I had my own pony, and I had about 10 acres to run around in, apple orchards and the whole bit.
Wow.
To get to school, we had to take a snowmobile just to get to the bus.
So I take it you're growing up in northern Canada?
Pretty much, just near Peterborough, and a little place called Baileyborough on Rice Lake.
And so where does the parish come into it then? Did you go every Sunday? Were you quite a religious family?
Well, my dad was an alderman in his church. So, yeah, I grew up Pentecostal/evangel. So religion means something different to me than what you'd celebrate over here in a lot of ways.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I went to an Anglican school later on, but back in the day, I went to a Pentecostal church, so it's more of a celebration.
Okay, so it was like a kind of party, for want of a better term.
In a big term. I got to do things like I learned how to play the cowbell and the spoons in church.
Wow. And so every Sunday would you get up and do something as well as other people in your church?
Well, not every Sunday, but we'd sort of lead up for it and we'd practice for it. And every year we'd do a big play or something.
Okay.
One church, we actually did a live nativity scene where we brought like live camels in and llamas and sheep and shit everywhere, but it was lovely.
Wow. And how did you feel about the performing then? Did you see it as something which you really enjoyed? Was it something special or?
It was just part of life. It was play. And so I always saw it that way, and I still think of it that way, to be honest.
And when you went into high school, did you go to a theatre kind of performing arts department? Were you part of the performing clique there?
I was, but I wasn't. I was always backstage. I was sound and lighting. I actually
Okay.
took a job under the AV technician, and I was doing all the sound lighting, all the backstage work, and I started going into amateur theater, never on stage, but always behind the stage.
And did you have a will to be on the stage at that time?
At the time, it terrified me. Ever since the day my voice changed and I couldn't sing anymore, basically I was always scared to be on stage. It broke a few times, and I got to do comedy sets and things like that, and I really loved it. But it actually took me years to get that back.
And so at what point do you start? Well, I suppose there's something else because I know you quite well. We've hung out for years. I know chatting with you that you was a hacker and you was very into computers when you were young. So am I assuming that then you left school and went and did a computing degree or something like that first before you performed?
Strangely enough, I didn't. But I did actually audit university so I could actually learn the things I wanted to do.
Okay.
Uh, in high school, yeah, I was very into the computers. I spent most of my time breaking into computers around the world, mostly as a form of communication. And that was in the early days of the internet when everything was still text. And the only way to get on the internet was literally to break in through your local university. And you met all kinds of really interesting people on there, from professors to scientists, to every conversation you had was really cool.
Well,
So
and how difficult was that to do then? Did you need a lot of specialist knowledge to even access that? Was it a very clique, an inner clique of people who had this knowledge?
well, yes and no. It was actually a bit of everybody, because everybody was equal back in those days. It didn't matter what walk of life you came from. It's just whether or not you could figure out the tricks to get on. And you met the people that could. Uh, back in the day, it was just back in the day of BBS systems. Do you know what a BBS is?
No, I don't.
A bulletin board system.
Okay.
It's where you literally phoned up somebody's home computer and talked to it with your computer.
Okay.
And in those days, if you wanted to get the information, you would get into one of these BBS systems, and you didn't even necessarily knew where they were. Had to look through magazines or whatever, or do a thing called war dialing, where you called every single number in a phone exchange to find out which computers would answer.
Okay. And so you just, kind of brute force seeing which people are on the net.
Oh God, yeah. And if you wanted a university, you'd find out which university numbers had the things, find the exchange they were in, and eventually you'd find a computer, and then you'd slowly work your way into the systems.
And was I right in thinking that you had something to do with the freaking movement that stopped national call charges? Was it? Am I right in remembering this?
Yeah, that was actually a good one. It was back in the days when they first introduced three-way calling. And what I was trying to do was talk to my friends in Toronto. I was out in Georgetown, which was long distance. So I had a friend that was in between in Brampton, and he got three-way calling, and we set up a computer program to answer the call and throw it through. Eventually, what we did is create a software which would allow me to phone up his computer, link the call through by calling back, and we started my first computer business back in those days based on that. And finally, after my partner never quite wrote the software, we released it public domain to the world and made a couple of multi-million-dollar corporations.
Wow.
And didn't see a penny from it, of course. But in those days, it wasn't about the money. It was just about learning how the systems work and learning how stuff worked.
And so this was like an inner clique that you're in. This was a community you're in, right? Did you go and juggle in another community? Were you going and learning circus skills in another group of people, or did you want to perform first and the circus skills came after?
It's sort of in between. When I was doing the computer stuff, I still can't do computer stuff and actually go out and do a show. It completely is an opposite side of the brain for me. So I was when doing computer side, I was an introvert. I'd live in my basement. The only thing I saw was a screen, and the world became alive through the screen by going to other countries and talking to people in other countries, or manipulating the phone system so you could talk to strangers in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And did sort of the same thing we're doing right now, but we'd have like 50 people all at different volumes over a telephone system. Some people on the other side of the continent. It was like a giant party.
Wow, it
And
sounds like it's an amazing thing, but you said you can't, even to this day, you can't do that and do shows. Is that
no,
because it's the wrong frame of mind? What is that?
it's left and right brain. It's the only thing I've been able to work out. It's if I think in that way, I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to communicate with them. So actually projecting myself is the last thing in the world I want to do. Which is funny because over the computer I still could.
But you're
But
projecting yourself in a way where the control of the what you put out there and what people put into you is through this medium here. You've got ultimate control there. You don't have much jeopardy, I suppose, when you're in front of a computer. Whereas when you're in front of lots of people, there's a huge amount of jeopardy, surely.
it was completely the opposite. I almost had to reverse my personality in those days just so I could go in front of a crowd.
So how did this going in front of crowds begin then? Because you did this as a pastor, well, with the pastor in your church.
Yeah.
Then you go to high school. Then you're a young man in your basement flat on the internet, freaking and hacking. Freaking is hacking phone lines, if you didn't know.
Yeah.
How does the performer start coming out through this?
It came after my first trip to Europe. I went off on a school trip, and I'd saved up. I had 5 jobs throughout high school, saving up for
I'm
this thing.
very sorry to ask. Would you mind saying what year it was?
I have no idea, but I can guarantee it's in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah. So my first trip was probably in I don't know when in the 80s, mid to late 80s, and I went over on a stupid 3-week school holiday through Amsterdam, through Austria, and all that. And the one I had planned to do was actually change my ticket so I could stay and wander,
Okay.
which freaked out the family, freaked out everybody, but I was determined I was going to see the world. And although I'd had some performance experience under my belt, I still didn't consider myself a street performer back in those days.
Well, what would make you say you didn't consider yourself a street performer? So you're saying that you were a street performer,
No, I might have been a
you were,
performer, but I wasn't a street performer.
but you were doing stuff on the street when you were going around Europe, right?
Not the first time. It's actually where I got inspired.
How did you get inspired?
I ended up in Munich, Germany, and everyone had gone out the night before and gotten drunk, and I went with them the first one, passed out on the way back. The next night, I said, okay, no more. I don't need to be drunk anymore. I want to actually see the city. And I wandered off on my own, left the school behind, and I came across a performer whose name I still don't know. People have tried to tell me at times, and I've always tried to work it out. But this guy had a huge steamer trunk, and he did a show very much like Pepe would have done.
So it's following with mime.
Complete following, complete mime. What he did was pull costumes out of this box. And Pepe used to do an old finale very similar to his, where he dressed people up in costumes and had the people put on a play. Completely silent show. He was dressed up in a director's outfit, and I was just blown away. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Couldn't believe that this was possible. Couldn't believe you could gather a crowd without speaking. And
it could have been David Shiner. I interviewed him on the show.
Okay.
He did a show where he was a maker of a black and white film, and he would do a following clown to begin with, and then he'd get people out, and it sounds a lot like him.
I'm going to have to look him up now. Okay. Is he still performing?
He doesn't perform now. Now he directs and he teaches. He wrote and starred in a couple of big Cirque du Soleil productions. He does a lot of writing for theatre, I think, now as well, as opposed to doing street stuff.
Nice. Well, if it was him, he was definitely the one that inspired me, because I took that with me for years, and that's what sort of put the kernel inside.
And so what happened after that then?
Well, I traveled through Europe for 6 months, got lost, got in all kinds of adventures, ran into mafia down in Rome, and just experienced life, and got my bug for travel and for weird ass adventures. Ended up like losing bikes on the SNCF, ending up in England for a while that first trip. losing my bicycle on the railway, trying to find it, found it in Victoria Station, rode across Europe, rode to Paris on my bicycle.
Wow.
I lost my credit card, had to get people to support me to get down to Rome because you couldn't get credit cards except in certain cities in those days. And did my first trip around Europe just as a backpacker, living off savings.
And you're not juggling at this point. You're not doing any circus.
No, I'm not juggling at this point at all. After that, I go back to Canada and take a job for the airlines, and that's when I start juggling on the side.
What were you doing for the airlines?
I was actually an aircraft service technician, which means I was throwing bags and driving transporters around. I can drive any piece of equipment they have at the airport, and I can even bring in the planes with those funny little ones. And
so, at the same time as this, you started going to a juggling workshop, something like this?
It wasn't that. I actually started going to a place called Browser's Den, which was a little magician's shop, which I had frequented even when I was younger. And that's when I decided, okay, I've got to learn how to juggle knives. I don't know why, but I want to juggle knives. And so I went in every week, and every week they'd let me play with the Dubé knives, the first generation, and I would try to juggle them in the shop. Didn't have the money to buy them, and I'd be throwing them around. What's that?
Were they expensive then? Since you said
I was just broke. Let's be honest.
But were they more expensive than they would be nowadays?
Probably not. I just didn't have much money, and this wonderful man actually let me do it until I put them through my hand one day, and they were still sharp then. They actually had a sharp tip, so I actually put it right into my hand. It stuck up in my hand. Closed my hand around it, wiped off the blood, and he caught me and made me go home. He said, well, can you play with them next week? And next week, I actually bought my first set.
You bloodied them anyway, so you might as well get them now.
Well, that's just it. I knew they were the ones. Once you draw blood, they're yours.
Yeah. And so how long was it until you juggled?
Well, I pretty quickly, actually, because once I get my mind on something, I'm pretty determined.
And so it's quite surprising because I expected you to be in a juggling workshop and to be learning flower sticks before anything else. Because
no, I learned knives before I learned flower sticks. Flower sticks actually came when I moved to Vancouver.
So what sort of time difference are we looking at here? You've juggling knives for what, a year and a half, 2 years, 10 years?
Not probably like a year. I have no idea on times. My mind just doesn't work that way.
And are you seeing other people juggling at this time? Are you seeing a juggling community, or are you just in your spare time learning how to juggle these?
Oh, you're frozen up there a bit, Matt.
These props?
No, I hadn't. I actually came up completely outside the community.
Yeah.
Everything was just trying to figure it out on my own, with the exception of the magic shop, which would let me play with them.
If I'd frozen you.
Yeah.
And were you doing this with the intent of, kind of doing a show like what you saw the guy doing the show from the trunk when you're in
No, that didn't come until after I left the airport and ended up in
Germany? Was this the end goal?
No, I never had a goal per se. It was all just situations leading me to other situations. When I actually finally started doing a show was actually I met another hacker in Winnipeg. I got sick and tired of staying in one place, so of course I bought a Volkswagen van, blew it up, rebuilt it with my father, and drove across the country. And ended up in Vancouver eventually. And that's when I started actually doing street shows.
And so you're a competent juggler by this point, right?
Oh, no, it's horrible. I was absolutely horrible. I was doing walk-by shows, and that's when sticks started happening. I did a trip off. I was actually working with street kids and teaching computers in those days. So I had a bit of crossover, making whips and selling them to the local leather shop. And I did start a juggling company around those days as well.
And so you were making whips because of the farm, because you used them on the farm, or?
No, far from it though. The first whip I did get my hands on was actually my father's bullwhip on the farm. That was when I was, oh God knows how old, 6 or something. I was flailing around with my first whip until I left it out in the rain one day and I wasn't allowed to touch it anymore. It took me years to get that back.
Because the leather goes bad in the rain, right?
Exactly. and it was my dad's handmade Bic from his farm days.
So he wasn't best pleased that you ruined his favorite whip.
No, but I did actually inherit it years later.
So just to draw back to the story, you're in Vancouver now, yeah?
Yeah.
And so you're teaching computing to kids, street kids.
Yes.
You're making whips. I assume you're buying sheets of leather and you're cutting them and weaving them, right?
I'm actually using. I was actually using bicycle tires, suede, and making cat o' nine tails. It'd be flails more than whips.
Okay, just fun little things to sell on the street. Are you?
Well, I actually sold them through the top leather shops.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you weren't fly pitching, so to speak.
No.
You were actually going to shops and selling them to tradesmen.
Yeah, I was. They were being resold in like the top leather shop. I think it was Max Leathers back in the day.
And at the same time as doing that, you're doing walk by knife juggling on the street.
Well, after my first trip to California, I came back and started doing major shows.
So
that
were you
was
doing just not to jump ahead? When you're in Vancouver, you're doing walk by, just juggling some knives, right?
Well, I lived in Vancouver for 8 years, so there's going to be crossover no matter what.
So when you go to California, that's during staying in Vancouver, right?
Yeah, of course. It was actually supposed to be a very short trip to go see a Grateful Dead concert.
It's so interesting how many US performers I speak to that mention the Grateful Dead, that the Grateful Dead are part of their their performing experience in the very early days.
Well, it was a huge community. It wasn't even in the concert, it was the parking lot. Everyone went for the parking lot because that's where you saw juggling, that's where you saw showmanship. You saw so much stuff going on. It was all hippie performing. You saw fire shows. You never knew what was going to happen. And so I wanted to catch this before it disappeared. It was like the Woodstock of our age. And so I went down to see a concert that was canceled. That's the first time I ended up in San Francisco. And to be honest, in those days, I wasn't even interested in the jugglers on the pier. What I was interested in was Berkeley and in the virtual reality exhibits that my friend did, and Hayden Ashbury, where the hippie movement came from. And I bought myself a pair of bongos there and headed south.
Okay.
It was actually that trip in a broken down van. I blew my transaxle in Watsonville and limped it back to Santa Cruz. And that would be where I say I actually developed the show. I was traveling with a tarot card reader at the time and traveling with an actual circle show, which is an old hacker friend I knew from Winnipeg, Jojo the Dancing Bear. I have no idea what happened to him. Last I heard, he was in cruise lines. If anyone knows, please let me know. I'd love to say hi to him. But the tarot card reader got kicked out of town, and Jojo the Dancing Bear went out with all his juggling paraphernalia, his clubs, his flower sticks, and everything else. He wasn't that good with the flower sticks, to be honest. He had tried to teach me at that stage. I wasn't doing sticks yet. And the town basically looked at him like, yeah, whatever, until a one-armed man came up to him and had him juggle every single piece of apparatus he had, including the kitchen sink. That was his big finale, that he could juggle everything, including the kitchen sink. It had a kitchen sink with a stick on it so he could throw it.
That's quite fun.
For years, I still had it in the van, actually. The guy handed him $100. Both of them fucked off out of town and left me there. And so I had a choice. I wanted to get back to Canada, back to the Street Kid program. And so I figured, okay, now it's time to actually do something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. I'm going to get back to Canada. So I made a giant sign out of cardboard of all the different skills I could do, and no clue about a show, no format, no anything. And I was basically a glorified beggar in those days. And at the very bottom of the list had bad drumming and sci-fi trivia. The town sort of adopted me. One guy would come up every single day and tell me about infinity in a droplet of water, which turned out to be an acid trip that never went away. Another musician came up and played a different flute from a different part of the world every day for me to keep my spirits up. And during the days, I went out and I started juggling sticks. I got my first pair of flower sticks at that point, and I'd just go out and play with the wind and play on the beach. And at night, I'd go out and try to make money to get back to Canada. And
so you're just doing flower sticks with a hat out in front of you?
No, I wasn't doing flower sticks at all in the show. I was actually literally, I was cleaning grease traps in restaurants, and every day someone would come up to me and actually ask me a question about Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he'd give me money if I got it right. And if I didn't get it right, I was allowed to ask him a question. So every day for a month, I got money off this guy. And the sticks actually were just a personal passion. And there was jugglers in town. It was sort of a hotbed of performers in those days. I think the Kamaz brothers came from there. There was Renegade Juggling was based there. So that was the first time I really got exposed to hardcore juggling. And these guys are what taught me the basics.
And were they, how did you come into contact with them? Were they seeing you on the street, or were you going to a park where they juggled in?
I was set up in the center of town, and they all saw me and saw my sign and came over to talk to me and asked me why I was there. Because Santa Cruz is quite a small community, and I was literally in the main street. And I tell them my story and tell them I was trying to fix my van and go back. And they would take me aside and teach me stuff.
Okay.
So, in fact, the entire show these days is based on what they thought was impossible. The Louisville Slugger, Tim Raines, the original one I used to juggle in the show.
You're going to have to explain it a bit better for people who might not understand what all of those words together mean.
Okay. Louisville Slugger, Tim Raines is actually a baseball bat that was issued based on a baseball player called Tim Raines. It was a wooden, heavy ash baseball bat, heavy as hell, which the first one I had actually won in a competition as a child and had carried it with me everywhere since. So it was in the van, along with the shoe shine kit and the other silly stuff I was doing to make money. And the last thing I said to the guys that were teaching me the basics was, I'm going to juggle this. And they thought I was completely nuts because I was unbalanced. I said, well, has anyone ever done an unbalanced stick?
Juggle it. By juggling it, you mean
stick juggling? Yeah, stick juggling with two hand sticks.
Can you explain that a little bit for people who might not know what that is?
Okay, it basically is you have two hand sticks which never necessarily leave your hands, and you're manipulating a third stick.
So you hold sticks like this in your hand, the sticks go out like that, and like that, and then you hit a stick about in the middle with them, right?
Yeah, and I always had a rule. I'd never wanted to trap them. I wanted to actually be able to flow freely because it felt like water to me.
And so everybody that was teaching you said that you wouldn't be able to manipulate, you wouldn't be able to hold this baseball bat in the air, right?
They thought I was completely nuts, yeah.
And so I assume you couldn't do it straight away. I assume.
Of course not.
Yeah.
I went back to Vancouver and I went completely insane.
How did you get home?
I did make it back. Strangely enough, I made the money. I basically did anything I possibly could. Bad drum playing paid off quite well. The drummer came by and taught me how to drum. Made fun of me I was on his pitch. He took me aside and taught me basically how to play the drum. I haven't done it since, not for years anyways, but I always have a drum in the boat. And I did make it to a Grateful Dead concert, the next one that came up. And I think that's probably where I bought my first set of sticks, was at a Grateful Dead concert.
And that was during the time when you were down there?
Yeah, when I was in California.
So you didn't just make enough to get home, but you were going to concerts and kind of having a bit of a life where you were there as well, right?
I never made it into the concert. I never actually saw the Grateful Dead. I made it to the parking lot.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. And that's open access.
Yeah, so I could hear the concert in the distance, but I never actually got what I used to call in those days a miracle ticket.
And so I take it there's more people outside than there was people inside.
Oh, definitely. And at the time I had like traffic signs, and I was wearing my fluorescent vest and directing people around and stopping them and just playing, which is sort of what my show is today, is literally just play.
And so you buy the sticks there, and you go home shortly after this?
I still had to go back and make the money to get to Canada. My original mechanic, he was arrested and put in jail for beating his wife.
Yeah.
It was the States, and not so pleasant. It was the murder capital of the world. They had basically earthquakes every few years and wiped the entire town out. I'd just been there after one of them.
Wow.
The big night was actually when the drummer decided to introduce me to liquid THC. And I made the mistake of drinking like $2,000 worth in one gulp.
Oh, wow.
Not knowing what I was doing. and spending that night going out drumming in front of the main club. Couldn't walk or talk for 3 days, but I did have a lot of money afterwards.
Wow. So it didn't work out too badly for you then?
No, some of my worst actually turned out to be some of my best. And I took that money, got a new transaxle, switched to transaxle myself with the help of a Mormon friend that I'd met, and started driving back to Canada. When I got back to Vancouver, that's when the insanity began. I was determined to actually learn how to juggle this stupid baseball bat with 2 sticks. And from that point on, I spent 3 years, 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. I wish that was a lie. I literally just juggling from the moment I woke up to the moment I went out, trying to figure out how to do the patterns.
And how did you start to learn it? Did you do it with a flower stick to begin with and learn how to do the basics? Or did
I had learned the flower stick down in Santa Cruz, because I'd spent all my days for that month going out to the beach and playing with wind and learning different things. And the guys were teaching me the basic methods. Basically the hippie jugglers and some of the professional jugglers. They'd take me aside and say, no, you're doing it wrong. Do this way, do that. And the baseball bat was the first one I did by myself, because no one had done it at that stage.
And that's in Canada?
That was anywhere. I asked them.
The first time you did it was in Canada.
It was in Canada, of course, yeah. And that was basically back in Vancouver.
And when you get to Vancouver, are you doing shows regularly, or did you go back to your job with the kids, teaching computers, and just do this as a hobby still?
Well, while I was away, they actually shut down the program. The city had actually shut them down, and it was a bit of a political kerfuffle. You can look it up if you want to. Look up the SKID program, and you'll see all the old stuff. You'll probably still see it online. But because of the politics, it shut it down. I had nothing to do anymore. I was back in Vancouver, and that's why I just sort of threw myself into juggling. I was ended up on the dole for a little bit, and then I discovered that I could walk out and do my juggle practice in front of the shop and make all the money I needed. So I was literally a walk-by juggler, literally in front of what was a Max Milk back in the day. And I'd go out, I'd juggle until I had enough money to pay my rent or pay for my food for my dog. Had a dog back in those days. And then go back home and juggle some more, and then come out the next day and do the same thing. So was I doing a show? Probably not, but I was just doing technical juggling.
And so how long? Sorry, carry on.
No, no worries. Eventually, that turned into a walk-by show.
Yes. And so when you say it turned into a walk-by show, you started developing a start, a middle, and end. You started developing a set routine you do when you got people to watch.
Well, what I actually had was about 5 and 10 minute sets. And this is the way I learned anyways. I would put together a little set routine. The maximum would last about 5 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes. It developed into 10 minutes and got up to 15 minutes. And so all my shows came from those little 10-minute sets. And just piecing them all together.
What was the things you were focusing on that time? Were you cognizant of building the 10-minute show, or did it just happen?
Oh, I had no training whatsoever. I was literally just trying things and seeing what worked.
But what I meant was, were you cognizant of it? Were you building it thinking, I need to put this here to do this. I'm going to put this here because this does this. I want to build people at the beginning, so I'm going to do this trick, which is big, which will draw people in. Were you actively thinking and planning the show, or did it just naturally come out of what you were doing?
It came out of weird ideas in my head. No, I had no idea of linking. I had no idea of putting things together or cause and effect at that point. It was really, everything was trial and error. It was actually around that time that I ran into a few other performers. And I did see one. I saw Madam Busker fly at a busker festival. It showed up to town. And that was the first busker festival I'd ever seen.
And what did you think when you saw that? When you start seeing professional touring buskers?
Then I started to see how things could strip together. And I think she was doing a unicycle show back in those days. And they did offer for me to go on tour with them.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, I thought it was incredible. It was the first time actually meeting up with community. And they said, well, come on tour with us. We're going here and you can come with us and you can learn along the way. I didn't think I was ready. So I politely declined and went back to my little isolated thing.
Before we go on from going back to there, what did you feel when you saw this stuff? what was the feeling of someone being a sidewalk busker to see people doing circle shows?
It let me know there was something more out there and it could become more. And it was something that to gear up to. And it became a goal. And once again, it was just a seed in the back of the mind at that point. It wasn't anything concrete. But I'm pretty sure because of that, and the help of a few other performers as well, that showed up and doing walk-by shows as well. Like Dado at the time showed up and was doing balloons on the street beside me. Magic Man was another one. He was actually doing set shows with start, middle, and finish, but he was doing 15, 20-minute show, which were a little bit more developed than mine. And Dado actually invited me on the road too. He was going down to Venice Beach and Santa Monica, and he tried to bring me down. And it was around that time I blew up my wrist and I couldn't actually perform anymore.
So just before you blow out your wrist, how are you integrating this understanding that you've realized when you've come into contact with bigger shows? How are you taking that information and applying it in your own work?
Basically just listening to stories and listening to routines, listening to old routines, mostly just through coffee and cheap sandwiches in the local bread basket, which was a restaurant in Vancouver at the time. It just cost 25 cents to get a bun, and you could put peanut butter and honey on it or jam or anything you wanted. So every night we'd end up there. And by listening to the stories, I was learning bits and bobs.
Yeah, there's so much understanding you get from the back of a pitch, or from, at least for me, it was sat in bars at the end of days, and
Yep.
you'd sit and chat and talk about what you'd seen that day, what other people did, the mythology of all the other performers. How did you apply that, though? How did you take that information and then put it into your work? Did you?
I basically, once again, the shows just got longer. It just got more intricate. I learned how to lead one routine into the next routine. I learned how to do different routines for different reactions. I started experimenting with fire. I started experimenting with danger. I started experimenting with musical sticks. I was still very, very technical.
Musical sticks?
Yeah, I actually created a set of sticks with bells and sliders in them that I could play music with.
Okay.
You'll never see me do them today. I don't have any left anymore.
Is it because it was a bit naff, or?
It was very naff, but it was fun, if that makes sense. Most of the stuff I did back in those days were extremely naff. They made no sense whatsoever, but I liked them.
But you were at that point of experimentation. You were playing and seeing what was possible, right?
Exactly. Everything was just an experiment.
And so you're starting to build a longer show. You're experimenting. You're playing. You're putting different things in, and then you blow your wrist out, right?
Yeah.
Is it carpal tunnel, or?
I got tendonitis in both arms, and it turned into
from doing this?
It's from doing the baseball bat, actually. Yeah. I'm doing this heavy piece of wood and doing it wrong because I had no clue how to do it correctly. There was no one to teach me in those days. So I basically 8 to 10 hours a day of throwing a baseball bat around. It's going to take its toll. And unfortunately, it did. It blew up my wrists, and for 3 years, I wasn't able to juggle anymore.
Why? Is it physical pain, or you?
Oh, yeah. Moving my wrist hurt. The doctors actually told me I never would juggle again. They told me my juggling days were over.
Wow. How did that feel?
Yeah, I was devastated because it had become part of me. It had become part of my makeup. I loved actually going out and doing my shows every weekend. I had a ball doing it. I got to see people smile. I got to see the reactions. I'd already gotten addicted to it. And then all of a sudden, a doctor's telling me, oh, you can't do that anymore. And so I got quite depressed, and I went back to computers.
And did you believe that you couldn't do it anymore when they said it? Was the physical symptoms enough for you to think, yeah, maybe you're right?
Well, to be honest, I couldn't. It was hard for me even to type. It was literally that bad. The typing would hurt.
Wow.
So what I did was I said, okay, I can type if I can get all the wrist restraints and I can get all that. So at least I can still go back to computers. And then I pursued computers again. And worked my way back up through that field.
Well, obviously you didn't just pursue computers. You obviously started performing again.
That happened later, and it came because of the computers.
Okay.
I ended up working for a whole bunch of computer companies, internet providers, things like that. Egghead Software, which was a retail company. I became a salesman, basically. It's actually how I met Robin Williams. He walked in the toilet one day in the back of the shop.
Wow.
Yeah, so, but from that, I
Hang,
actually,
hang on a minute. Hang on. Tell the story. You go
okay.
tell the story.
So I'm working in a retail store, an Egghead, called Egghead Software. We'd shut down every store by basically doubling the profits. Turns out we were right off for an American chain. But we're in the very last store before they shut it down. I'm in the back room, which is supposedly closed off completely to customers. I'm taking a dump, as you do. The door wasn't locked because there wasn't supposed to be anybody in the back room. And all of a sudden, I see this man walk in on me. First thing I say is, get the fuck out. And no idea who he is, no idea why he's there, but he's caught me with my pants down. So I'm pissed. Finish my business, go back out, call the other employee, because there's only two of us in the shop, into the back room and start yelling at him. Why is he letting customers in the back room? Who the hell was it anyways? And he turns around and says, oh, it was Mr. Williams. I said, I don't care if it was Mr. Rogers. You don't let customers in the back room. I said, no, Mr. Robin Williams. What, like the comedian fucking actor? And he said, yeah. I said, oh, yeah, I think we got a memo he might be coming by. So I apologized to the guy because obviously I was out of line. And I said, now go back to work, man. I'm just upset because someone walked in on me in the toilet. And I sent him back into the sales floor. And as I'm walking out, compose myself, go back out, do it myself. And there's Robin Williams waiting at the door, listening to every word I've said, still waiting to use the toilet. So, of course, I turn around and said, anyway, you know where it is. Go for it, mate. After that, he became my best customer in the shop. He came in every week. This is back, and I can put a date on this one. This is during the filming of the original Jumanji.
Oh, wow. So it's like 93, something like that, 92, 93.
Yeah, because he was actually filming it at the time.
And in Canada, there's tax breaks for movie studios, right? So they will.
Vancouver's like Hollywood North. Yeah, they gave them great tax breaks to come up. And Vancouver can be a lot of cities. Toronto always looks like an old New York, and Vancouver can be anywhere, depending on the angle you shoot at.
Yeah. 1 second. Can you just take Doc for us? Just take Doc. Sorry, carry on, buddy.
No worries. So he becomes my best customer. In fact, back in the days of that movie, they were all playing Doom and killing each other, and I was selling them all the hardware to do it.
Yeah, funny.
It was fun. But he actually taught me a lot. He taught me how to deal with fans. He taught me because he always had people following him around the shop and freaking out and going nuts on him. He actually taught me how to deal with those people, and I still remember the words he taught me in those days. Always to treat your fans with respect, because they're the ones that actually make it possible to do what you love. And I've never forgotten that. And that's something he taught me because of the insane fans that were in the shop. In the end, I started closing the shop early just so he could shop without people bugging him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So it seems like he gave you some good advice.
Yeah.
So you said that you got back to performing. You said the reason was because of computers.
Yeah, I actually met my wife over at IRC, which is internet relay chat. I was talking to a text-based forum on the computer. I think I was working for an internet provider at the time. I had left Egghead already. And we met and fell for each other online on a chat base. And she flew all the way from Australia to Canada, and we ended up getting married.
Oh.
She got homesick, went back to Australia, and I sold everything in Vancouver, gave away my dog, hardest moment of my life. Went back to Toronto to try to raise money, and ended up moving to Australia to try to save my marriage. Devastating part of my life. I didn't save the marriage, but what I did notice is the dry heat in Australia gave me movement back in my wrists. I was able to start moving my wrists again. The pain went away. And so while my marriage was falling apart, I built myself a set of sticks. And I couldn't work because I didn't have a work permit. I went down to Fremantle and started doing a walk-by show again. And just built it from trash I found around the neighborhood. And started doing 8 to 10 hours, doing night shows on the weekends. And once again, going back to a walk-by show. And that's what turned into the Circle Show.
How did it turn into the circle show then?
Well, when the marriage fell, well, first off, the performers sort of adopted me there as well.
So who was there? Was there a performing community there?
Matty Blade was the big name at the time. I'm not sure if Cam was around at that point or not. A man named Phileas Freak is one I'll never forget. He doesn't perform anymore. He went back to being a chef, but he was a bit of a hippie performer. And there was another performer. It might have been Andy Fish, looking back and trying to correlate. But what this guy did is they actually messed with my walk by show. I was doing a show in front between the clubs, trying to do my 10-minute shows as I came out of one club, going to another club and back and forth. And I'd do that all night long because the clubs went all night long there.
Picking up the traffic.
Exactly. And 10-minute, 15-minute shows at that point. And one of these guys came in and stood on his knees and his hands in the middle of my show. And all I could think is, okay, what's with this guy? Is he mentally deficient? Is he on drugs? And then it clicked. He was a performer. And at that point, I realized, okay, if he's a performer, I can do anything I like. And so I started using him as a prop. And I started doing sticks over his head and around his body and basically just used him as a prop in my show. And I did a 15-minute set with him in the middle of it. And he got up and walked away and never said a word. The next night, Phileas Freak came up. And he put his suitcase down and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm doing a show." And he said, "No, why are you doing it here?" And I said, "What's wrong with me doing it here? This is my spot." And right in front of a no busking sign, of course. And he said, no, why aren't you on the main pitch? And I had actually tried to do one show after all the performers went home. And I tried to do a circle show. And it just failed flat on its face.
Explain what happened.
Well, now I know. I did it the wrong time of day. I didn't know how to get the focus. I could do it for short periods of time. I didn't know how to hold the focus. I didn't understand transitions. Because everything I'd done when I hit a transition, I'd let them go. So I had to learn transitions. How I learned that was actually Phileas Freak coming up and challenging me, saying, you're more skilled than anybody here at this time. Why the hell aren't you on the main pitch? I said, no, I'm not ready. And he said, you're as ready as anybody. He got mad at me. And so we're fighting back and forth. You're ready for the pitch. Get on the pitch. You're welcome. We've all seen you. You're welcome on the pitch. Stop doing your walk-by shows here. Get on the pitch. Do circle shows with the rest of us. And I'm fighting him, telling him I'm not ready. So I'm fighting myself, basically.
Yeah, I understand the feeling. I had it when I began. I didn't want to go and work in Covent Garden.
I remember.
Because you've got that God worship kind of thing, and it's like imposter syndrome. Oh, surely I'm not good enough to do this. I
remember when you had it. That's why I tried to encourage you at the time. It goes back to the same time when I felt the same thing.
I remember the days in the South Bank, but maybe we'll get to that later on in the story. So you're encouraged by Phileas. What was his
Phileas
last name?
Freak.
Phileas Freak. He's sort of berating you, but at the same time whispering honeyed words into your ear.
Well, actually, he challenged me. He did the one thing which I can't handle. I was challenged. I had a fire stick, and he said, "Well, you gotta learn how to do this. You gotta learn how Australia works." And I said, "Okay, fine, show me. But first, do a show." And I challenged him. And I said, "What?" I said, "You're a performer. You can work any pitch. You think this is bloody easy? You go do it. You can have my pitch. You show me how it's done." And he couldn't pull it off. He couldn't actually hold the audience on the walk-by pitch.
Because he's used to building and taking it slowly and gently.
Of course, he's doing a circle show.
Yes, whereas you were hitting quick turnover on a busy thoroughfare.
Exactly. It was a different kind of show. Not saying that was a bad show. It was just a different kind of show.
So how do you come to doing circle shows then?
Well, actually, it was what he did next. He turned around and made me go out into the middle of the street and stop the traffic and learn how to gather huge focus. He literally made me go out into the middle of the street and stop the entire town. And
can you go into more detail with that?
Well, I was working right in front of a domain where cars would drive up and down. It was sort of a strip. So he basically said, okay, walk into the middle of the street and perform in the middle of the street.
In the middle of the road where the cars are.
Yeah. Do everything you're not supposed to do. Stop the town. I took it as a challenge, and I did.
Okay.
And I stopped the town for about 15, 20 minutes. And at that point, I got my first true focus, where I'd taken all the focus from everything around me. Even then, I didn't feel ready to do the circle show pitch until the marriage completely dissolved. And I decided I was going to do the impossible show. And once again, and go all the way around Australia and do a circle show for them when I got back.
Okay, and learn on the way around.
That was it, yeah.
Okay.
And I started collecting stories of everyone who had basically made it around. It hadn't been done in over a decade, supposedly. And everyone that failed told me their story and where they messed up and what lost them, where they got. A lot of them got stuck in Surfer's Paradise. Most of it was on the East Coast.
And when you say they failed, by failing is just getting stuck in a place and not moving on and keeping going around the circle, or
having to sell everything and go back.
It's people run out of money.
And run out of money, yeah.
Yeah.
And what actually got me around Australia was the walk-by show. And as I went, it slowly developed.
The circle show slowly developed.
Yeah. That was my goal, was to build a circle show and to build a strong enough show, so I come back to Fremantle and perform it for them in Fremantle.
So how are you doing the time management to do the show that's making you money, which is the walk-by show, and develop the circle show? Because it's so difficult when you have something that's supplying what you need. You know, you're traveling, you need cash. If that show's working and making that cash.
I turned the 10 minutes into 15 minutes, 15 minutes into 20 minutes. I started linking the stuff. I actually built a show that trains all the bits I do in the show today.
Okay, so you didn't do a separate show, which was the circle show and then the walk-by show. You augmented the walk-by show and slowly built it out.
It sort of happened. There was sort of a natural progression where the bits started coming together, and I started finding the linkages between them. I knew I wanted to do it, and so every time I saw a natural connection, I went for it and saw if it worked. If it didn't work, of course, you put it aside, do it again another day in another place, until I finally found what worked and what didn't. And probably broke every rule in the process. I didn't learn the rule 3. I didn't learn the right way to do things. I picked up what Phyllis had taught me, which is be big, go over the top, end up in your underwear if you have to. That was one of his. And that did happen in Melbourne. That was the first time I ended up in my underwear during a show. So by the time I'd actually gone around, I'd probably already done, I don't know how many circle shows. By Melbourne, it was starting to happen. By Sydney, I had a rudimentary show. And I always had the walk-by show to fall back on when I needed the money.
And so by the time you do the full circle, have you made the full circle show?
Yeah. I actually had already performed a full circle show in Townsville. I'd already performed a full circle show in Cairns. I'd already performed a semi-circle show in King's Cross in Sydney. So by the time I made it to Sydney, I basically had my general idea. After that, I was just making it better and better.
And so what was the circle show? Was it a 45-minute show, a 40-minute show? Was it a half an hour show?
It varies from half an hour to 45 minutes, probably back in those days.
And is it the show that we know now with the umbrella, the pitchfork, the baseball bat?
Well, the walk-by show actually had the baseball bat, the umbrella, the canoe paddle. They were actually from the original walk-by show.
And were they just things you picked up on your journey?
Yeah, they were things I found. I had a posted tube that I used to throw over people's heads. And if it was a big bad biker type, I'd bounce it off his head.
I remember the posted tube.
I missed a posted tube sometimes. It was silly. It looked a lot harder than it was. Yeah. It was always made out of cardboard. And you know what that was originally? Was literally a postal tube that I painted red. And I found that in the garbage in Fremantle.
So when you do the full circle, because you don't do the walk-by show that much anymore. I don't do it at all anymore. I've known you. when you got to do the full circle, is that kind of the end of the walk by show after that point, once you've made this circle show and it functions?
Well, I still can use it for sets. Back then, it was sort of a carny game. Well, I'll tell you about it. I still remember some of the patter. Had a wine rack in front of me with all my sticks in the wine rack. So I had a stick for each wine bottle. And the game was pick a stick, any stick. The game is to pick the impossible stick. If you pick the impossible stick, I'll show you the impossible. But you don't want to pick the impossible stick first, because then you see less juggling and you want to see more. So what I want you to do is pick 2 wrong first and then go for the impossible. So which stick do you want? Everyone gets a chance. And of course, you could pick any stick you want. Yeah. But are you sure you want that one? And every stick would have a different routine. And you'll recognize some of the routines, juggling over top of the guy, or I had the fire stick in there as well. The fire routine was basically technical juggling with fire. The impossible stick was the Louisville Slugger Tim Raines baseball bat, which actually leads to a fun story. My first stop on that trip, I decided to ride off from Perth or Fremantle. And I've already done some I did mini shows in Perth as well at that point. But I wouldn't work in Fremantle because Fremantle was the big pitch. Perth wasn't the big pitch. That was always the hard one for me.
And did you when you say you wouldn't work the big pitch, you still felt uncomfortable about?
Of course I did. Yeah.
But you say, of course you did. But why? You've got a working show.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't working completely. I've always been a perfectionist about everything I do. So when it failed, I would be devastated. And of course, whenever you're starting a circle show, it's going to fail. Even a seasoned performer knows not every show is going to work.
Yeah.
And the hard part is getting over that and realizing it's a show. Who cares? You got to be willing to let go. You got to be willing to zone the show to let it go and go on and do a next show.
Street performance is chaos.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't ride the wave. Sometimes you fall over.
Yeah. Phyllis was the one that actually taught me that it has to be chaos. It's got to be controlled chaos.
Yeah. And so you worked Perth, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before they started licensing. And I was doing my walk-by show in Northbridge as well, which was a bit rough back in those days.
And so how do we come to the point of Tim doing this big, huge circle show? Is this developing here in Australia and there in Australia?
I'd say Australia gave me all the rudimentaries. The show you see today probably comes from Ireland, though.
And was that shortly after? How long did you stay in Australia after this point?
Well, I did probably about. I couldn't stay more than a year, so it was probably a year going around.
And did you ever end up playing on the big pitch?
Yeah, of course I did. After my first Fringe Festival.
Please tell us of the Fringe Festival.
Yeah, my first Fringe Festival was Mr. Spin up in Darwin. It doesn't even exist anymore.
Okay.
Back in the days when the Darwin Fringe was still going. I'd already gone 3/4 of the way Australia and gone down to Alice Springs. Ended up meeting Mr. Spin for the first time, which had heard about me because I was some weird guy juggling a baseball bat. And he was the stick juggler in Australia in those days. He still is an amazing stick juggler. He can do things I can't do. Thankfully, there's still a few things I can do that he can't.
It's quite fun to see two people quite high in their levels be able to have respect for each other and be able to be good at their own things.
Oh, to be honest, as a technical juggler, he's a much better juggler than I'll ever be, and I know that. But he was actually looking for me all over Adelaide when I showed up and did my walk-by shows.
Just because he'd heard there's this guy doing a stick with a baseball bat.
Yeah. Okay. And it was something he had always wanted to be able to do.
And did he teach you? Did you try and teach you?
He never got the original, though. He never got the Louisville Slugger. In fact, I did hand it to him one time, and he broke it.
Wow, how?
Yeah, too heavy. Because it was heavy ash wood. So he actually tried to manipulate it, and he dropped it and broke the baseball bat.
And so was that the end of the baseball bat?
No, it was just chipped. But that was one of the ends of the last ones. Yeah, the last of my wooden ones. And he actually, to say sorry, that festival gave me 3 of his aluminum ones.
And so it sounds like there was a lot of community there.
Oh, there's community all around the world. Australia was brilliant. It helped that in Adelaide, somebody had given me like very large amounts of marijuana. which I didn't necessarily need or want. So I ended up giving it to every single pitch all around Australia.
Which bought you a lot of friends, yeah?
It probably bought me a few points, yeah. And so they put up with me.
So what was your experience like at working the big pitch for the first time?
It just felt good. It was hard. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And it's probably why I'm still doing it. Because I've done a lot of stuff over the years. I did the computers. I've worked for companies, done sales. But doing the circle show was literally, it always changes. You never know 100% what you're going to walk into. And the rush of that is addictive. And of course, if you make a living from it, it's even more addictive. So I've always called it my favorite addiction.
And did you feel a sense of achievement when you finished the show?
Yeah, because I could finally say, yeah, I did it. See, I can do this now. And that's when I left Australia.
Where did you go?
I went back to Canada. Went back to
Wow.
Canada and was absolutely abysmally depressed because
Why
I
did
wasn't
you go
doing.
back to Canada? You seem like you had a great time in Australia.
I didn't have a visa for Australia. I had never gotten the citizenship. I had broken up with the ex-wife who was Australian, so I literally had to leave because I had the end of my visa.
And so you said you were depressed when you went back to Canada.
Oh yeah, but the boys in Fremantle had told me I have to go to a place called Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival.
Okay.
And I'd been once before, but they said I have to perform. You have to perform here. You have to go here.
So
And I listened.
did you go the year you were traveling? You just went and saw some shows?
Well, basically what I did is that next year I went. I had traveled across Canada first. I got offered a house if I was willing to actually stay in a water company that a friend of mine ran. He said, if you stay for 1 year, I'll give you a house. And he was a computer guy as well from the old computer days. And my friends were working there. And I said, I think I have to go do something. As much as I'd love to work with you, and as much as a house after a year sounds like an amazing deal, I need to perform. I don't know why. And so I had a choice of going to Edmonton and trying to do the Edmonton Fringe Festival, or hopping on a plane from Calgary. Edmonton was like 3 hours away, 4 hours away. Easy trip. Go there, do a week, come back, get my work for a year, get my house. No, I decided to hop on an airplane and go to Edinburgh, Scotland instead, with no money. Flew to Manchester, bought a car that you had to hotwire to start. Managed to pick up a girlfriend in Calgary, brought her with me. Arrived in Edinburgh with literally 2 pounds in my pocket.
Did you bring your props from Canada with you? Did you take your props from Australia to Canada and then from Canada to Edinburgh?
Actually, I had them in Canada. I basically built a basic kit, and I had done shows in Calgary and along the way. I'd done little shows. I did the Stampede in Calgary when I was there, and that's how I knew there was no way around. I did Stevens Street or whatever. I can't remember. It's a main strip in Calgary. And I'd done shows there as well. I think I even tried to go back to Vancouver at one stage, but the licensing system had come in and they wouldn't allow me to do my show anymore. My show had been banned under the new licensing system.
How was it? Why was it banned? What was banned?
Because I had a baseball bat. It was a dangerous prop, and you couldn't do baseball bats because that was too dangerous. Back in the day, I had one of the first Granville Island permits, but I got frustrated and left. I never actually went back and did my show in Vancouver at that time, anyways.
And so you've got the hot wired car. You've met a lady on the way who's now traveling with you, traveling buddy. You've got your gear. You go to Edinburgh.
Yep, £2 in my pocket. No clue whether or not how I'm going to fit in, what I'm going to be able to do. And the director of the festival, which, oh God, what's her name? It was Kathy Dix. Kathy Dix was the lady that greeted me. And she turned around and said, okay, do you have your insurance? And I just looked at her and said, what? And said, you need to have insurance. If you don't have insurance, you can't perform. I said, I don't have any insurance. I said, how do I get insurance? And said, what do you mean you don't have insurance? Everybody has to have insurance. And I said, well, can I do a show first? I said, well, I can get you insurance. It's going to cost you £50 for the festival, because I gave out insurance in those days. And I said, well, I don't have £50. And I'm looking at the £2 in my pocket and thinking I have nowhere to stay tonight, and I don't know how we're going to eat. And so she said, well, what kind of show are you? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, no, you got to know what kind of show you are. I said, no, I have no clue what kind of show I am. And I didn't think of myself as a circle show. I didn't think of myself as anything else. I just knew I was big enough to work in Fremantle. I was big enough to, I didn't think of myself in those terms.
Was it
And
because you didn't know those terms, or was it because you just
well, I didn't really. I, I was still out to left field. And so I said, well, are you an alcove show or are you a circle show? And I said, I don't know. Can I just do a show? I don't care. And so she put me on the alcove pitch, which is now the Meerkat stage. Back in those days, there was no stage there.
So that's
And,
up the top of the mile next to where the church is, yeah?
exactly. Yeah. And so she let me have the pitch there, and she let me have one show before I had to pay my insurance. And I said, okay, all I need is a chance. If I have a chance, I can do it. And so I went out. I just did a show. And she came up and started screaming at me afterwards. Said, you didn't tell me you were a circle show. I let you have a pitch, and now everyone's complaining at me. The circle show on the high street is all upset. And of course, I'm still almost in tears. I didn't know. I just did a show. I said, by the way, here's the money you wanted. And I gave her the 50 quid. And thankfully, the show had paid for the accommodation for the night. And we went out and had a nice dinner. And I was banned from alcoves forever in Edinburgh by Kathy Dix at that point. And so I was never allowed to do another alcove show.
And so did you go into, was there a draw at this point for the circle shows in the following days?
Yeah, then I went into the circle show draw, and it turned out I'd actually already met a lot of the performers. I was actually once again really intimidated by Edinburgh, and I'd met a lot of them in Australia already.
And what was the community like for you?
Well, back in those days, Pepe was God. Pepe was the king of Edinburgh. He had his show. No one ever took the show, and Pepe would actually destroy new performers. It was very old school, Covent Garden.
What do you mean by he destroy new
you tried by fire. If you couldn't hack it, they would literally wipe you out mentally.
And what would they do? Would they get in your face? Would they be mean to you? Would they be bullying to you? Would they say mean words?
They'd get into your head. It was more a psychological thing.
Okay.
The weird, and I actually watched it happen to another Canadian performer. Lovely guy. Used to do what Tash does these days, hanging upside down and juggling clubs. And he did it on a bar. Had people hanging onto the bar, and he'd hang from the bar and do this. And I actually really liked the guy. He was really nice. But I watched him get put down for not being good enough, not being amazing. Strange enough that I got left alone. For some reason, I never understood why, but I got completely left alone. They didn't try to intimidate me. I don't know. I always thought of myself as small. Maybe it's because I was big. Maybe it was because I actually had some skill. I actually had some skill built up already.
But was it also maybe you knew a lot of the guys already, and it was sort of you already had a foot into the community, and this guy's an outsider. He was someone they could bully without fear of other people doing something about it, supporting, judging them.
It's why I always had the bullying factor in street performing, and it has gotten less over the years, which is good. But back in the old days, that's how you came up. If you could handle the bullying, and you just had the right to be there, you could handle a crowd because you could handle what the other performers gave you. It was a trial by fire. I do understand it, but I didn't like it.
Frat boy hazing kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. And so you've got that. You said Pepe was the god there. But how were other people with you? You said people didn't try and haze you, but were people sitting by the show and advising you? Were people... was it this workshopy kind of helpful environment, or?
It was more they just wanted to see what you're going to do, and I didn't care. I just went out and did what worked with the audience. I didn't really care what the other performers thought or said.
What year was this? Was this 93, 94?
I have no idea. Honestly, I don't. But it was after that year I came back from Australia. I don't have an idea with dates because I don't think that way.
Thinking about it, we've got to be hitting at least 95, 96 at this time.
Yeah, you can look up Kathy Dix at this point and find out when she was working.
There you go, everyone.
Yeah.
So how does your first year go by the end of the month?
Well, I didn't make a lot of money, but I felt established as a performer. I was willing to take more chances. I I walked, and then I went all the way around Scotland, doing every town in Scotland as well, and just kept traveling. And introduced myself to police sergeants so I wouldn't get into trouble when I went out performing, and shut down.
Is that your technique for not getting into trouble? Is being kind of very polite, very nice, but very overt?
Yeah. I literally, in Inverness, I literally walked into the police station my first night I was there, asked to see the head sergeant. And the head sergeant came up to me and said, "Hi, I want to have a chat with you." I said, "Well, why? Is there anything wrong?" "No, there's nothing wrong whatsoever. But I'm about to go juggle weapons in your town, and I want you to do a criminal check on me." I said, "Well, have you broken any laws?" I said, "No, of course not. But you won't know that until you've actually done the criminal check on me." And he said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes. Think about it. Some weird guy starts juggling weapons in the middle of town. You don't know who he is. You're going to send down a police officer to try to arrest him and then do a criminal check on me. I'd rather you do it first. That way you know I'm okay." And the guy started laughing, did the criminal check, realized that I had no prior records, and said, "Where are you coming from?" I said, "Well, I just come from Edinburgh." I said, "Okay, that makes sense." Every year I did Inverness after that, he literally sent 2 undercover officers to watch my back.
Oh, it's very nice. And did
And
you ever have a problem with work visa?
well, at the time, no, they didn't look twice at it, and no one was worried about that. And you only made what you made in the show, what people donated to the show, so you weren't officially working for anybody, anyways.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so you go around Scotland. Is it after this you go to Galway and you start traveling in Ireland, or do you go back to Canada again?
Well, I did go back to Ireland, but it wasn't Galway I went to first. I actually worked my way around Scotland. Then I decided I wanted to go to the Cork Jazz Festival, because in those days they told me the family came from Cork, and my grandfather was from Cork, and they were a bunch of backwards, superstitious bastards, and I wanted to find out why. This is my grandfather talking, not me. Anyways, so my grand goal was to go to this jazz festival and perform at a jazz festival on the street. I made it as far as Dublin. In Dublin, we actually parked the car, and I said, "Okay." And I went up to a ticket guy and said, "Okay, I need to park. How do I do it?" And he said, "Oh, just keep feeding the meter. As long as it doesn't take any money anymore, you're good." And I said, "Fine, I can do that for 3 days, yes?" And he said, "Yeah, it's fine." So I started feeding the meter, and I went off to do shows in town. And I came back, and my car was gone.
Wow.
Yeah, so I phoned up the police and reported my car stolen. And they said, no, it's on a clearway. And in those days, I had no idea what a clearway was. And they explained it to me that basically at a certain time of day, they clear all the cars from the street. So they've towed my car and impounded my car and clamped it about 4 or 5 blocks away. I didn't have the money to get the car unimpounded. So I literally went to the car, got all my equipment out of it, and stripped the car of everything, including the battery and radio and what have you, and left the Hulk on the street and went out to do street shows. Never made it to the jazz festival that year. I did become a local Dublin performer, though. And 2 out of 3 shows, every single day I'd go out to perform, the Gardaí, or the local police, would come down and tell me it's illegal to be a street performer and shut down my shows. And for 3 months, I sent an audience that were rioting against this poor Gardaí officer that was sent out, because I wanted to see the show. And every day I'd send them, I said, "Well, no, it's not his fault. He's just doing his job. He's probably really a good guy, but he doesn't want to do it either. You look at his face. He obviously does not want to be in this position. I really don't blame him. I wouldn't want to be in his position. So please, you're paying his tax money. You're paying for his job. You do have a voice, but yelling at him isn't going to do anything. So go down this street, go 2 streets up, go into the big office over there and ask to see the big man there. He can do something about it." So I sent 2 audiences every day for 3 months to the mayor's office to complain. And strangely enough, 3 months later, I get a message from another Gardaí officer wanting to make a deal with me under the table. And that's how we started performing in Dublin.
And what was the deal?
The deal was they were going to give us Temple Bar Square in the heart of Temple Bar, and they wouldn't shut us down if we were doing shows before 10 o'clock. Any show after 10 o'clock would be immediately shut down. I agreed because it got too dangerous anyways. And Originally, when I made the deal, the last poor Gardaí officer came out, used the excuse, which you've heard before, I'm sure. We've had a complaint. And I turned around to the guy and said, "Oh, okay. You've had a complaint. Well, could it be this jewelry shop here that originally brought the law in banning street performers? Maybe it's then a complaint." And I said, "Well, no, hang on. They like me. Maybe it's McDonald's over here." I said, "Oh, no, hang on. Give them my change. I know all the managers." "Well, maybe it's the language school upstairs." I said, "Oh, no, wait. I'm doing a tourist video pro bono for them, so it's probably not them. Oh, it must be this guy over here, because he's the only other person that could possibly be affected, and he's just coming into work. He's the owner. Hey, mate, how you doing?" And said, "You didn't complain by any chance, did you?" And the guy's going white the entire time. And at that moment, and he's asking him, "Okay?" And I said, "No, I'm fine, mate. We're just having a little chat." And I snuck up really close to him. No crowd, no anything. I said, "Mate, let's drop the hats for a minute. Let's just be human beings. Can you do that?" "There wasn't a complaint, was there?" And he said, "No." I said, "Your sergeant told you to say that." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Go back to the sergeant and tell him exactly what happened here today. I won't leave. I'll stay. I'll be having a chat with the guy over there. He's a friend of mine as well. And we'll see what we can work out." And that's when he came back with the deal. And for 3 years, we actually had the Temple Bar pitch. People like Rastafarian and Owen Lean and, oh God, Todd Various, and a whole bunch. And even Gary learned on that pitch.
Gary Michaels.
Yeah, Gary Michaels. They all learned out of that pitch.
And so who was there when you began? Was there a scene there when you started, or was it quite an empty space?
There was still some musicians. Musicians were always there. Who predated me was Dice Man. Dice Man was one of the first ones in the country, and he was a living statue. He was a transvestite living statue, and they arrested him and went nuts. He was the first one that made legal battles in Ireland, well before my time. I never met him.
Did he win?
He did. And he became a legend because of it. There's actually still a plaque to him in Meeting House Square in Dublin. There's actually a few plaques around Ireland, the performers before. There's one for Johnny Massacre, John Duran, who learned in Covent Gardens. He's in Galway. And there's one that put up that plaque down the road a little bit further on the left-hand side, if you go looking for it. It's one thing I always loved about Ireland is they respected their own. And they remembered them.
And so you worked there for 3 years?
Yeah, I don't even know how long I worked. I used to go back there every summer.
How did your work develop?
For 3 years.
How did your show develop while you were there?
By leaps and bounds. Because I knew nothing about the Irish and the Irish mindset at the time. Every show I did there was war. Because what Canadians do is they take the piss out of themselves first. And that then gives them permission to eventually take the piss out of the audience. The Irish work the exact opposite. If you take the piss out of yourself, everyone joins in, and you immediately have a riot. And it took me close to 3 months to work that out. And once I clicked it, then I would pick 5 targets in the audience, rip them to absolute shreds. Always the ones that you figured were going to give you trouble. And then when they're just about to punch you in the face, the magic words "just messing" came out of my mouth. Then the audience,
would that calm everything down?
Yeah, the rule, the cultural rule seemed to be as soon as you said that, if he actually still attacked me, he would have lost the game.
It's bad form.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely bad. And then you switch, and then you can take the piss out of yourself, and you realize it's all a game. And it has to switch.
And the video we saw at the beginning of this interview,
yeah,
where you've got that huge silver box, and you're known now on the international festival circuit for having the biggest box of any performer. You have a box that you could literally sleep in.
Yep.
You said that before we began the interview, you said that was the first time you had the box. So did you start doing the box there?
Yeah, the box came from Ireland.
And
in fact,
why did you start doing such a huge oversized box? Because when we watched that video, you were only still doing the same stick routine. So I assume that box wasn't a necessary prop to store, a necessary tool to store your gear. It was a prop, right?
Well, actually, remember how I said I have no clue with numbers? That's why I got the box.
Okay.
I originally, I got robbed when I first got to Temple Bar. And I got robbed again at a benefit concert. They stole my knives. And the local bands actually did a benefit concert to help me get some new knives. And I was getting robbed on a regular basis on pitch. They stole sound systems, they stole microphones, so I decided I was going to get myself a giant lockbox so I could keep my stuff in so I wouldn't get robbed. So I phoned up the Dublin Flight Case Company and tried to work out the measurements. Got a measuring tape, measured all my props, tried to figure out the smallest case that all my props would fit in. Ordered it over the phone and waited my 2 weeks until it was made. And then when I showed up to look at it, you saw that silver box with the two Canadian flags on it.
And the box is about 3 foot by 2.5 foot by 3 foot, right? Something along that. It's huge.
That one was even a little bit bigger. My current one is smaller than that silver one.
Wow. I mean,
by about 2 inches. Yeah. It became the largest street kit in the planet. And it was actually made because I'm number dyslexic. I had no clue what I'd ordered. I'd already ordered it, so I had to take it. My honor wouldn't let me do anything else. So I've got this giant box sitting in their showroom. And I think, what the hell am I going to do with this? And so the first thing I did was jump inside it, close the lid on top of myself. Said, okay, it's a toy box. It's like a Tinker trunk from Dr. Dress Up. This will be amazing. How the hell? I don't care. I paid for it. I've got to get it. I've got to do something with it. I can't waste it. And then I jumped on top of it, and the guy went white. Said, you can't do that. You can't do that. And then I said, well, I'm going to do that. If I'm going to have a prop this big, I got to do something with it. And then I threw it up on end, jumped on top of that, and the guy started screaming at me to stop. I said, I'm going to pay you for it. He said, it can't take it. It's not structurally sound enough to do that. I said, okay, well, fine. And so he put I said, I'll fix it so it's structurally sound so you can stand on it. And so he put a big wooden board in there, which I turned into a bed of nails. Shep was doing the bed of nails long before me. And the bed of nails came from the fact that I built an oversized box that needed a support beam. And the bed of nails came into it because I needed something to actually support the box so I could stand on it.
Is that much later, or is that directly after getting the box?
This is directly after getting the box. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was actually Johnny Massacre that helped me build the first bed of nails. And I'd known about them before, of course, but we built them up and the nails got further and further apart. But the first one I tried was Johnny's, which was piss easy, like most bed of nails. Anyway. And
so did this become your finale then? So you did your flower stick?
Not at first. Originally, I had 2 finales. I actually had 3, but the third one wasn't developed yet. Originally, what I wanted to do was get a small unicycle, because I had a unicycle at that point, and I used to ride it around the show when I started the show. Never a big one. And I wanted to put a small unicycle on top of the box upended and ride it on top of the box.
Just sort of stall it on top.
Yeah, stall it on top,
yeah.
which was completely insane. And I don't think anyone's ever done it, except they've done the rope, but I don't think they've ever done it on top of a box.
Well, on a rope's a bit of a gaff trick, because what you do on the rope is you take the tire out.
You take the tire out and you got the groove, of course.
You have the rim, so all you need to be able to do is ride a unicycle and walk on a rope.
Yeah.
Understand those 2 mechanisms is reasonably easy.
Yeah. But in the end, I talked myself out of that one. What I used to do instead was I built my knife. I had my knife stick. And the knife stick actually came from a drawing I found in Vancouver, Canada, while doing research on sticks. And I kept the image in my head for years and years and years that I wanted to actually build the original weapon. And I'd only had like a hand-drawn drawing of it. And so I made that up in Ireland as well. So my finale at the time was actually with the box upended, having the blade spin in, laying down and juggling over my head and laying back up with the knife going past my throat. But the bed of nails was always made more money. So I let the audience and what I used to do is give them a choice between the finales. And I always chose 50-50. But they paid more when I did the bed of nails.
So you naturally gravitated towards doing the bed of nails as a set piece.
Exactly. So the bed of nails became the standard finale instead of instead of the knife stick. The knife stick's still in the show, but I just used it for instead of the fire stick.
So it sounds like you made a lot of gains in Ireland. It sounds like you developed a lot. You had a lot of experiences. Your show moved on a lot there. Why did you leave Ireland?
I actually wanted to travel again. I got itchy feet. I decided I was going to hit mainland Europe. So at this point, I've already traveled around the box to Edinburgh back and forth every single year. I traveled all the way around to Ireland by trains, buses, and any kind of transport whatsoever, moving this giant, stupid box. And I decided I'm going to go to Rotterdam to the EJC that year, and with the box, and I bought a van. Drove back to Ireland and figured, well, hang on, I got a van. I'm going to go travel Europe now. I'm going to see the mainland. I haven't actually done the mainland yet. And so I drove across and ended up in Germany. And ended up living in Germany for 3.5 years.
Why did you end up staying in Germany? What made you stop?
A girlfriend, strangely enough. Ran into a girl that I'd met in Dublin years before, and she offered me her couch, and it turned out she didn't have a couch.
Okay. She offered you a place to stay.
Yeah. You know the old adage, what's a street performer without a girlfriend? Homeless.
Yeah. And so when you're working in Munich, it's Munich, right?
No. It was a small town called Wiesbaden outside of Frankfurt.
Okay. And when you're working there, how's it different from the other place you worked? Most of the places it sounds that you've worked before are English-speaking places.
You got it. That's when I started doing following and going back to that original show that I watched. And I started doing a complete following show to build a crowd. Because I couldn't speak the language. My German to this day is atrocious. I can do my show German, but my speaking German is not really there. I can ask where the toilet is and order food, but that's about it.
So you did following, you did physical comedy.
Yes.
To begin the show. And then you learned the words necessary to perform the show in the Deutsch.
I not only learned the words to perform the show, but I learned all the possible rebuttals for the hecklers. And so I learned every possible thing they would say back. And I designed the show to limit them. So the first time they would be able to have 5 things to say. I'd memorize those 5 things and the variations of them and get responses for them. I'd limit them even further until they could only say one thing back, in which I could nail them.
And was there a particular thing that you found was different about what people found that was funny, different from Canada, Australia, Britain, Ireland in particular? Was there a different thing with the German audience, different style of comedy?
Well, they loved the clowning. The walk by, they absolutely loved it. They appreciated the skill. But most of the performers there at the time were all skill-based, and they didn't understand the flow. They didn't know how to gather a crowd. They didn't understand the rules of gathering a crowd and holding a crowd. They didn't understand transitions. And I was right next to a clown school, and Mainz was actually a clown school, and I'd have performers come over and try to perform in Wiesbaden next to me, and none of them got a crowd. They never actually understood how to hold a crowd. And I at that point, thanks to Edinburgh, actually, and a challenge I got given one year when said, well, you'll never be as good as a performer. I won't say who. I don't even remember, to be honest. Turn around. Well, you can't do a show like Pepe. You can't do a show without saying, gather a crowd without saying a word. And so that year I went out and did it. And that's what led to my clowning in Germany. It was because every year in Edinburgh after that, I started a show without saying a word. It became a personal challenge to not talk. And so I spent years gathering my crowd without saying a word, just by playing. And once the crowd was there, then I'd break the silence and then I'd talk and switch the show back. I did the same thing in Germany. I worked on my clowning until I could gather a crowd. I could hold a crowd. And once they were locked, that's when I'd actually open my mouth.
When you say you worked on your clowning,
yeah,
what were you working on? How do you work on your clowning? How did you work on your clowning?
It's the same way I always did. I went out and just tried routines. I did the follow down. I did the following. I actually got people so pissed off at me that every single show someone was willing to punch me in the face. And I actually learned how to do a backflip just for that moment.
So when someone goes to punch you in the face or they're angry, you backflip?
I backflipped and landed on the ground.
So
They never made contact.
You mucked it up so that
Of course.
they felt like they won.
Yeah, and then of course I'm off to. Actually, they always came out confused because they knew they didn't hit. And I've done this incredible backflip to the thing and fallen sprawled out of my back like they'd completely taken me out in this glorious way. And I get up, ready to challenge them, barely able to move, in drunken monkey style from martial arts.
And there was something you told me about Germans liking wordplay. You found that German audiences liked you to make jokes which were misunderstandings between one word and another word, convoluting meanings.
My favorite one from my show was gefährlich and gefahrlich. The entire way through the show, I gotta remember which is which now. It's been too long. Das ist mein gefahrlich show. And I'd say this all the way through the show, and I'd point to signs that say danger on it because I understood enough English to be able to read the danger sign. And there was always some point in the show when a German would yell out in the middle of the show, gefährlich, nicht gefährlich. And my favorite line, stupidest line in the entire world, but I loved it, was tomato, tomato. And the entire show was set up so I could just say that.
You were mispronouncing on purpose.
Yes, and at that point, they actually realized it was all a joke, and that every single mispronunciation was intentional. And that way, I came up one more level in their eyes.
So why leave Germany then?
I couldn't stand it. I learned to hate Germany.
Why?
Well, one, I never made a fortune there. It just wasn't my country. It felt really restrictive. I'd have ordnance or city inspectors like rangers or council officials come up and say, you can't do a show, das ist verboten, wo ist der Papier, where's your paperwork? And I'd explain back to them in German, I don't have any paperwork, I've already talked to your boss, I don't require any. Here's his phone number, he told me to give you the number to call him. And they'd never call, and they'd come out and yell at me all the time. And I'd get translators partway through the conversation because I really didn't speak enough of the language to have the conversation with them, but I'd learned the basics. And they kept yelling at me, said, "Oh no, you speak perfect German because we've seen you do a show and you can do this." I said, "I'm parroting." Do you know what parroting is? I've memorized bits and pieces.
Because it just appears like you speak perfect German because the words are flowing easily from your mouth. They have no idea that in reality you don't know how these words fit together. You couldn't rearrange them and say anything different.
I've studied how the parrot responses from what there's only so many things people say. You hear the same lines in every single show. Yeah, even in an English show, you do the same show, you're going to get 5 or 10 lines that everybody responds back with. You learn those lines and you translate those lines and translate to the next level. You can limit a show and limit a heckler's responses down to nothing. And I'm used to dealing with hecklers at this point. I've already worked in Ireland. I've already worked in Scotland. Hecklers were rife. And when I didn't have hecklers, I missed them. So I actually created hecklers in Ireland. I taught them how to heckle effectively because they kept coming up with lines like, you suck. And I can only say, if I sucked, you'd never go back to women so many times. It got boring.
Yeah. So you start encouraging having more engaging discourse with your crowd.
Exactly. And I had regulars at that time. Back in Ireland, I'd have regulars that come every single week. I had running gags going through the shows. And in fact, it was all about the running gags.
And so you leave Germany. You leave
Yeah.
Germany because it's not working for you.
Yeah. Well, I did spend 3.5 years there. So I did break even, but I never actually made what I'd call a profit.
Yeah. So where'd you go next?
I got hired back to a busking competition in Ireland. They literally offered me half the money to get back, and I said yes.
Okay.
I get back to Dublin, and I said, okay, I'll make the money on the street. I know Ireland well. I know the Irish show. It's not a big deal. I go to Temple Bar. Owen's still there, and we figure, okay, it's fine to finally make a demo video so people actually know who I am, so I can apply to festivals and things like that, and not just show up and be a rogue performer. And the day we're supposed to make a video, they burned my van to the ground. And so everything I brought back from Germany was completely wiped out. The demo video turned into a documentary. You can watch it if you want. Type in Stickman Dublin van. I hate it, but it's mostly accurate. Ignore all the stuff at the very end. It's all lies. But I actually did that. That's why I ended up working for Irish Ferries to try to raise money to make it to Edinburgh that year.
And did
And
you
I did do
lose
the.
your kit? Did you manage to keep your kit? Did you lose your kit when the
Oh yeah,
van burned down?
the kit was wiped out. Most of the kit was wiped out. I still had the metal parts, but the best way would be to look at the video. But you can actually see the wreckages in the video. I brought
And
Owen
so-
along with me.
And so, did anyone do a charity benefit? Did they manage to buy a new kit for you so you could start working again?
Yeah, it's once again the performers in Ireland were absolutely amazing. They went out while I was at the juggling the busker competition. They all lent me equipment first. One guy would lend me an amp, another one lent me an MP3 player. I think it was an MP3 player back then. I can't remember. Anyways, a music player. Just enough to do a show. You know what I mean? And went down there and had fun. Got in trouble with the festival because I hijacked a car in the middle of my show and went for a ride around town. Came back to the audience and finished the show. Wasn't very well appreciated back in those days. Living Space does it a lot these days, but I sort of messed up with the town though. I had picked up that trick in Germany.
And so you did make the money to get back to Edinburgh?
I did. I did. I worked as a children's entertainer at Irish Ferries. I did build up a street show again, and got a new box because at this point, so many people told me I couldn't have a box that I had to have a new box. Because let's be honest, I'm a stubborn old git. And so
is this when you got the box that we know now with the big Canadian flag on it?
I always had the Canadian flags, even the little ones before, but I think the box after that was the first one with the big Canadian flag. It was only recently they changed colors from silver to red.
And when was the next journey? Did you stay in Ireland for some time after that?
Oh God, I'm trying to remember now. Give me a second. I actually wrote notes on this stuff. Okay.
Well, you've done very well. You haven't had to check your notes so far.
Yeah, I've been pretty good. No, I hit the road again. I think, yeah, after that I went to the Key West.
Okay. Why Key West?
Because it was warm and I hated winter. I'd already done too many years in Ireland through cold, wet winters.
So I heard Key West is quite a difficult place to, for want of a better word, penetrate. If you're not one of the old guys, you don't really get the good spots.
Well, the first thing was said to me by one of the performers down there, which was the big boy on pitch, was that he's going to get rid of me.
Why?
He didn't like me. He didn't like me, and he's going to do everything he can to make sure I wasn't allowed to stay. Which was the exact wrong thing to say to me.
And was that just a personal grudge, or?
Yeah, he thought I was too squeaky clean. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. He had nothing on me. And to be honest, the guy at the time was actually selling heroin to school kids, so it was quite easy to get stuff on him if you wanted to. Once again, why I'm not mentioning the name.
Fair enough. And so what happened with that?
He did get caught, and he was never kicked off the pitch.
What happened with you working the pitch?
I stayed there for 5 years.
Okay. And,
I sort of dug in, made friends with the locals, got local accommodation. After the van was burnt down, I decided I was going to buy a motorhome. That was
the van was burnt down in Ireland.
Yeah, but I spent the next 6 months, and after Edinburgh, I went to Florida and bought myself a Class C motorhome, a 30-foot motorhome, and I decided that would be a good something else to tour in, since I no longer have a van anymore.
Yeah,
and
so
built another box.
So you took that up to Key West, so you had a place to stay.
Yeah, and at the time, I think, I my first one there, I got a gig at the Hilton Hotel, and Gazzo had set that one up. I didn't know it at the time, and they were paying me $100 a night to perform in Sunset Celebration and collect the hat. And I lived in my motorhome because it was right after the hurricane there, and did shows every night. I did that for a while until Gazzo showed up.
And then he took over the gig.
Pretty much, yeah.
And did you get to do the good pictures in Key West? Did you manage to be accepted by the group there?
Well, how it works there is a seniority system. I'm not a big fan of it in any way, shape, or form. What they do is the longer you be there, the better pitch you have. So unless you're from there, you will never get the best pitch for at least 10 years. It takes 10 years to actually crack up to the best pitches.
And how much of a difference is there between the less preferred pitches and the prime pitches?
Well, basically you can still do it. If you're a good performer and you can work without a mic and work without music, you can work anywhere if you can get on pitch. The major difference was whether or not you got a pitch or not.
And why wouldn't you get a pitch? Was there too many performers, too few pitches?
Yeah, so there's more performers there that were higher seniority. You weren't necessarily going to get a pitch at all. And the only way you'd get to do a show is if one of the performers was willing to share the pitch with you.
And so what, did they get the pitch for 3 hours or something?
Yeah, it was 3 hours, and they only performed for 3 hours a night in Mallory Square, and they would get the pitch for the entire time.
So they could easily let you go on and do a show?
Well, if they wanted to, yeah. If they're willing to share the pitch, then they could let you do it. But to be honest, there has always been a lot of performers there for the pitches available. And although they call it a lottery, the lottery is for each bucket. So if they've been there for longer than 10 years, they're called a grandfather. They choose first. And some of them just are established pitches. They always get the same pitch because they've been there for so long. Will Soto will always get his pitch. The bagpiper will always get his pitch. Bible Bill, a street preacher who's in the draw like everybody else, will always get his pitch because they've been there for so long.
And you said you didn't like that system.
I don't like it. Well, every system I've ever set up has always been open for everybody. No one had an advantage. As long as you could hold a crowd, you're more than welcome to be there. And if you can't hold a crowd, I always made sure there was another pitch they could learn on.
Why do you prefer that to having a seniority system?
Because you can take somebody out and starve somebody out of a pitch. You can get rid of people just for the sake. It had nothing to do with your talent. It has nothing to do with anything else. It has to do with how long you're in one place. And I was always a traveling performer. I like traveling from country to country. I like traveling from city to city. I liked hopping on a plane and going to a country I've never been before to see if I could do a show. I've done lots of that, and I still want to. And so if every pitch was like that, I wouldn't be able to. I'd never be welcome on a pitch. Said, oh no, you haven't lived here for 20 years, therefore you can't perform. Whereas if every pitch was open, everyone could travel and everyone could feel welcome. I think of a worldwide community. I don't think of a country community or a city community.
I don't travel so much, but I definitely agree with you that I think open pitches are better. We have a more diverse and interesting culture on the open spaces rather than being protected. We're reaching the last 15 minutes of the interview now, so I feel like we have to power through a bit more. You got to have a place there. You worked in Key West, but I assume you didn't stay there. You moved on, right?
No, I spent most of my summers in Europe and my winters in Key West. Basically, I just escaped back and forth. And I'd go to Canada in between, ride motorcycles from Canada all the way down to Key West, or in the motor home or whatever.
And how many years did you do that?
Oh God, I don't even know anymore. 5 years in Key West, yeah. I got my 5 years seniority, so I did 5 years down in Key West. But before Key West, I worked in Fort Myers Beach as well, which was another Gazzo's pitch back in the day. It's gone now, unfortunately.
Why is it gone?
They regulated it to death, and it just made it not really worthwhile. There might be Bertie McLean might still be down there. Who knows?
Welcome to London 2021, eh?
Exactly.
So you're not doing that now. So something changed. What changed?
Well, I got a little bit older, and I started getting an agent to fly me out to all the places I wanted to go. And I started getting booked for festivals. So I wanted to have a base. I wanted someplace to always come back to. That's recently I've been going to places like Poland and Macedonia and Thailand and Indonesia and anywhere that would book me because it was an interesting place to perform. Stuart's actually done a lot of that for me. He's actually great.
From Dolphin Creative.
Yeah, Dolphin. Sarja, being one of the first performers ever to be legally allowed to pass a hat. That's, for me, one of the ultimates. It's always about the adventure. It's always about doing something different. It's not about the same old adventures. It's always about the adventure. It's not about how I do it.
Yeah.
And as I get older, it's a little easier to have hotels paid for when you get there and a flight paid for.
Now you say you wanted a stable base, but yet
Yeah.
I know right now that you're living in a catamaran and that you spent the last few years traveling all around Europe and the Mediterranean in the catamaran. That doesn't
What?
sound
No,
like
that's not entirely true. I spent 6 months sailing the catamaran from the other side of Spain, down through the Mediterranean, around Ibiza, down to Gibraltar. Ran into a little bit of trouble by Gibraltar.
what happened at Gibraltar.
Oh, that was my one of my better misadventures.
Okay.
My entire career is filled with misadventures. Any performer that knows me knows I've had something go wrong at some point or others. I tend to extend my neck out a little bit far and then try to
You're
find my way back.
not a stranger to calamity.
Nah, but that's how you learn. Every trip I've learned from has actually been through a bit of calamity.
Yeah.
This one I was trying to get out of Gibraltar because the officials there were insane. I
What do
had
you mean
done
they're
shows
insane?
all down the coast.
So they were insane in trying to stop you from doing shows.
Yeah, well, it was actually only one police officer. Everyone else agreed that I wasn't breaking any laws, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But I was so happy to finally be in an English-speaking country again, where hopefully I can make some money because I'd already done Spain, and I was doing shows, 5 shows, Christmas Eve in Malaga, and I didn't have enough money to pay for the mooring for the boat for my 2 pieces of rope, and I didn't even have electricity. Came back to nothing, cried my eyes out on Christmas Eve, and then sailed south again. One of those days. Get to Gibraltar. I'm so happy. Finally, I can actually do shows. They have a lovely big square. Police come up on New Year's Eve and say, you can't perform here. You need a license. Uh, I politely say, okay, I didn't realize. I'll go get a license tomorrow. And then I get told by every single level of government that you don't need a license. The second in charge of government told me I don't need a license. But one police officer is determined to arrest me and put me in jail for trying to do a show. I studied Gibraltar law for 2 weeks, memorized the criminal code, get myself. It's quite easy, actually. It is.
It's not a long code.
It's not a long code. It's only a 3-mile island. Uh, Walk into the police station, say, "Okay, I've read the law now. Let's have a chat." I got the police officer in the next room screaming at the top of his lungs, not wanting me to be able to do a show. Uh, as you let him do a show, the Spanish will be able to get in. We can't have Spanish performers here. And in the end, I just want to get the hell out of the country, or the territory in this case, and I sail across to Morocco. I have a workaway on me that's been helping me with the boat. Absolutely incredible. He wants to go to Morocco. I say, okay, I'm quite happy to get out of here. It's a new country. I haven't been there yet. Let's sail. It's 3 hours across the strait. I got a boat that can sail. Let's do it. We get about halfway across, and I have a freak storm come through right from the Atlantic. Tears through one of my sails before I can get it back. I run out, lose the other sail as well. Somehow managed to lose hydraulics trying to get back to Gibraltar to get repairs. And after I lose
So
hydraulics,
now you've lost your sail and you've lost your engine, right?
I've lost 2 sails. I've lost steerage, so I can't steer. And then I figure, okay, I can motor steer. I can get behind the rock and anchor behind the rock of Gibraltar. And then I lose one of the engines. So I am completely at the mercy of the seas and the storm that's building and building and building. All I can do is go in circles. We've made it back to Gibraltar waters. So we're actually in Gibraltar Sea. And so I said, okay, at this point, now I have to do an emergency call. Up until this point, I'm saying, okay, we don't need to. We still have steerage. I can still get to here. I can still get to safety. But at this point, now I can no longer steer the boat. We're a cork. There's nothing I can do about it. If I'd actually had a hand rudder, I still could have got out. So next time I go to sea, I'm going to make sure I have a hand rudder. A little piece of metal.
Like a skull where you can go like this to
Exactly. You'd call it a skull on an airboat.
Yeah.
I didn't have one on board, unfortunately. If I had, I wouldn't have had to call for help. So I didn't do a distress. I did a pan, and they ignore me. Gibraltar is actually talking over me on the frequency, refusing to acknowledge my existence. for 3 hours. We're out floating at sea, and I'm working out the course. I'm being blown to Algiers, and I really don't want to set land in Algiers, especially without steerage. Eventually, way up the coast, the Spanish Coast Guard or Marinera, I forget the proper name for it. They answer my call, and they wait for me to get blown out of Gibraltar waters, so they can send a boat out to, because they're not allowed in Gibraltar waters. They're self-managed, and they tow me all the way to Ceuta in Africa. Even though I made it back to Gibraltar, I had to be towed to Africa. I almost lost a boat for that one, and it's actually Steward that saved my ass. I've never actually, I don't know if I've ever even told him. Steward from Dolphin actually hired me in for 3 days when I really, really needed it. I had to smuggle myself from Ceuta because I wasn't allowed to be in Europe at the time because of 3 months visa. So I literally had to smuggle myself through Spain from Ceuta and get through the Gibraltar border without actually going to the border and showing my passport. So I had someone smuggle me in their car into Gibraltar again, so as if I'd never left. Trying to leave the airport, they tried to arrest me for my equipment. Going to Dubai for one of Steward's festivals. He had hired me for 3 days and paid me well enough that I could make a hint on paying off the Spanish government for the tow, which I had insurance for, but they wanted money up front. They wouldn't take my insurance. From there, I convinced the police showed up to try to arrest me. I had already talked to the police. They knew me. I said, okay, guys, am I breaking any laws? And I already talked to them about the laws. And they had to tell the airport inspection guy that, no, he's fine. He's not breaking any laws. The Queen's not in town. If the Queen was in town, yes, you could get him. I had looked them up. So they let me fly, and they didn't even send my equipment over for over 24 hours. So I missed a morning television show that Stewart had booked me on because the Gibraltar guys were messing with me. Stewart was brilliant. He paid me for the full things. I've made up the shows since. And because of it, I got them to change the ticket. I changed the ticket to stay in London for a month, lived on Pepe's floor, and raised the money to save my boat. And got the insurance money back and used that money to get all the way up to England.
And so you're now moored upon the Thames, right?
I'm moored in a lovely marina across from Canary Wharf.
It sounds wonderful.
It's, to be honest, I love it. I got a little village in the center of central London. I talk to my neighbors. I don't have to lock my door in the boat if I don't want to. I couldn't ask for more. And it's a great place to fly out of to gigs whenever we're allowed to do gigs again.
Soon, hopefully.
Oh, God, please.
And so we're hitting the final 7 minutes of the interview now. So at this point, I just want to get you to say a few words to people who are beginning and then to the people you know maybe watching. So first of all, people who are starting to street perform, people when we get back to normal, people who are starting life in performance. Is there any advice you give them?
At times, everything is going to go wrong. Don't worry about it. Embrace it. Enjoy it when it happens. Learn from it. Because you learn more from when things go wrong than whenever they go right. That's the biggest piece of advice I've been able to give. Don't worry about taking chances, because the more chances you take, the more you learn. Throw yourself into situations you're completely uncomfortable with, because they're the ones you're going to learn from. Don't worry about starving to death, because you know what? Chances are you won't. And you're going to learn a lot in those moments when you're trying to make it happen. And most importantly, play. Don't take it seriously. It's not about the money. It's a lifestyle. And it's an adventure.
It's wonderful, Tim. And for all the people who've been watching, I mean, in the comments now, we've had people like Rex Boyd, Melvin, Joel Spencer say hello. Many, many more people will watch this after, people who you've known throughout your entire life performing. Is there any of those, is there anything you'd like to say to those people who will be watching and have been watching and are watching right now?
Amy Greer, hi. I didn't forget you. She's going to kill me if I didn't say hi.
Fair enough. Everyone else, fuck yeah.
Now, I'll say one thing. The truth of the matter is there's no way in hell I could have done all the journeys and all the adventures I had without people helping me along the way. I've lived on couches across this planet. The hippies in Galway. I couldn't have in Galway for all those years without living on your couch. Let's be honest. If it wasn't for other performers, I wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for the community, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have had the fun and adventures I had. If it wasn't for the people that actually watched the show and fans of the show, I wouldn't be able to keep doing it. It's not about me. It never was. It's about having a chance to inspire people for weird and wonderful ways, and having the people that you inspire support you and keep you going. I think you understand that one as well, Matt.
Very much so, buddy. Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. It really, really has. And it's been a joy listening to your life story. A lot of things which, for me, knowing you for 15 years, there's a lot of things I've learned tonight. I hope everyone who's been watching has enjoyed listening to Tim's stories as well. Tim, thank you for your time. Everyone who's been watching, thank you for watching. Tim, would you like to say goodbye?
It's nice to see you all. I haven't looked at a single comment now yet, but I'll look later.
Cool. Everybody, thank you for watching. If you are watching now on YouTube, please subscribe. We put out videos twice a week. We will soon be putting out videos 4 times a week. If you're on the Facebook channel, please like, join the Whining On with Public Performers group, comment on the video, share if you'd like to. For now, from me, everyone, really have a good evening and good night. Good night, everybody.